what's doing all the work of making that pressure.
How do we know that it has weight? It doesn't even weigh down on a scale unless it's inside of another container. Otherwise, it doesn't track the scale at all. How do you know that it is weight?
Barometers.
Well, that's not true though. Me and Babs, we weighed the gas without having a container. He did without a container at all.
How?
He poured he made carbon. Well, we both did. We made carbon dioxide, and then put it on the scale. The scale increased. The CO2 has weight.
Yeah, it's literally pouring a gas, and it going downward is the weight of the gas pushing through the air.
Yeah.
But yeah, to drive the point home, if you have a vacuum chamber and you evacuate the air out of it, the vacuum chamber gets lighter. Now, you could argue about whether or not a container was used till you're blue in the face, but what you removed obviously had weight because there's now less of it. It's a pretty airtight argument.
Not quite.
At best, you have something that goes down, but you don't have a curve-making force. So you would still need something to contain the gas.
That's fine, because the weight of the gas is all you need. And whether or not that weight is caused by gravity is irrelevant, because you have the weight of the gas pushing down, giving you pressure.
Sands contain.
The weight comes from the container, the walls.
No, the walls don't give things weight.
Yeah, that's where that's where the force is coming from.
No.
So if you have a force, you will have pressure, you will have a weight.
Without a container, you wouldn't have a mass of gas that could weigh down on anything. It would just disperse and go everywhere, and the weight would be manageable.
Why?
That's what I mean. Is we did that. We
a mass of gas. It would press it down, and the gas would get out of the way and just dissipate. It would dissipate to get out of the way of whatever's pushing it down.
Well, actually, poured it on the weight on the plate of the scale.
Yeah, you said that.
Walls.
You said that. I saw what he did.
And I was talking to Lemon, Kimo.
Yeah, and the explanation for that.
There was no walls in that.
There were two walls. There were two walls. There were two surfaces. You had the container bottom, and you had the scale. So there are your two walls. Between those two walls is where you will get the pressure.
Somebody help Kimo out and tell me where the wall is.
Did he pull?
Yeah, no, that's definitely not what's going on.
Did he pull?
And also, what you're saying is predicated on having a column of gas in which you have a heavier gas on the top to weigh down something underneath that doesn't just disperse to get out of the way of the thing that's weighing it down. So for you to have a column, you need to have a container anyway. Otherwise, the gas weighing down on something else is irrelevant. It'll just dissipate to get out of the way.
Dispersion and mixture do not disprove gases have weight. That's a weird thing to say.
To have an air column, you need containment.
Keeping water in the ocean
is irrelevant.
And by the way, Lemonbird, you are committing a category error. You're trying to say that just because we utilize containers to hold things, then that automatically means that there must be a container for the atmosphere.
Necessary antecedent.
No,
not really.
It isn't.
Because we don't see gravity contain anything. You're just begging the question and saying that gravity can hold down something and provide
anything
contain.
about gravity.
We observe
I didn't say anything about gravity. I'm going off of your logic.
We're just using weight, man.
Yes, fine. So the weight comes from the container.
No, it doesn't.
Well, how can you have weight without the container?
Hold on. Kimo, how?
Just because you have something weighing down on something else doesn't mean that it's not going to dissipate to get out of the way. I could pull somebody through the crowd and the people will make way and get out of the way so I can pull the person through the crowd. What you're saying is basically saying I'm pulling this person through the crowd and it's pushing down on the other people through the crowd as this person comes through the crowd. They're dispersing to get out of the way. So one thing doesn't even follow the other. And it's worthless without containment to give you a column where this weight means something. So you still need the container anyway.
That's another false analogy. It's a really simple thing. You can take a thing of sand, right? Pour the sand out onto, say, a scale. You can have your hand in between it. You're going to feel the weight of that sand.
Up to surfaces.
You add more sand. You're going to feel that weight even more because it's more weight. It's more pressure is being built up because of the weight that's being added to it. The idea that you container is meaningless.
Talking about gases, not sand. Not
Doesn't
solid.
matter. Doesn't matter.
Yes, it
Well,
does.
he's
because
making-
sand has weight.
Beard is making the
Hold up.
Chemo, Beard is
There's
making
no-
a point anyway. It has to touch a physical surface to have pressure.
Right.
Thank you
shut
very
the
much.
fuck up, Flatzoid.
Oh, Jesus Christ.
Surface does not equal container. Oh my god, Flatzoid.
Surface
Stop
is-
misusing definitions.
surface
Physical
is-
surface is container wall.
Okay, regardless, what Bearded Devil is saying about the sand, you can
It's a
replace the
straw,
sand. You can replace the sand with water, and it would do the same thing. The water,
Not with gas.
It'll add a weight to the scale, and add a weight to your hand.
That's more dense
Some
than
Chemo,
medium.
shut the fuck up, Chemo.
That's a simple answer. It's
Some of
more
the
dense
sand,
than
some of the
medium
sand,
than it's
some of the sand will remain on the scale. Some of the sand will go away because it's
Okay.
sand. And it's the same thing. Some of the water will stay on the
in.
scale and
Relative
add weight,
density, yeah.
just as some of the water will go away.
Yeah,
The same way as the
relative
CO2, the same way as the CO2. Some of the CO2 will dissipate away, and it won't be able to stay on the scale, and some of it will, and it will add. The weight will
Yeah, you
persist.
just described relative
I
density.
got a question for Kosher. I got a question for my loud. If you take a pipe and it's thicker at the one side and thinner at the other, and you push water through, which side is going to have the more pressure? Where it's pushing faster or where it's pushing slower?
Pressure's
he
the
shuts
same.
up. Now he shuts
I
up.
think we're trying to figure
No,
out
the
why
pressure.
that even.
No, the pressure's not the same.
Watch your jump
Yes,
back
it
in
is.
a minute.
When water moves slower through a pipe, it has more pressure than when it's moving faster. You know why?
Yeah, that's what you said. You said that one end of the container is supposed to be thicker than the other, not
Correct.
narrower.
Okay, narrower.
Also, we're dealing with a fluid. This is the same situation, right, Flatzoid? Where there's a narrower part of the fluid has to pass through, and a wider part of the same fluid has to pass through.
Yeah, that's what I was
And they've
making a point.
also they've
Where
also done
which side has more pressure? The narrower or the wider part?
it's the same amount of pressure. You're talking about flowing water.
Fluid dynamics. Yes, flowing water. Yes, flowing water in a pipe.
Yeah, but
I think it's like a stats bar or
in
something. I don't know.
hydrostatics, which is what you're trying to go off of, it doesn't.
You see how I've redirected you all to
Volume.
saying we need containment to have pressure.
Exactly.
Thank you very much.
Oh, Jesus Christ. It is not necessary to have a container to have pressure.
The thing is, you're
Also,
trying
you
to
use the example of a
that
pipe, which is
container.
not a sealed container.
Gravity can only be a container if everything goes the way that gravity directs it. You have butterflies that are flying against gravity, birds, helium. I mean, gravity is not enough of a force of any consequence to offer any container. This is philosophically problematic.
Hey,
Birds
does a
and
good
butterflies
job of
have
holding-
wings. Helium is pushed up by the heavier air going down. Gravity does affect all things.
But that's still
And-
kind of begging the question because you're saying gravity's still affecting it, but the air pressure is just overcoming it within this column. I mean, it's still kind of very begging the question-y. I mean, it's kind of suspicious.
It's not
How is
begging
it
the
begging the
question
question?
because we know how much helium weighs for a given volume, given pressure. We know how much air weighs for a given volume at given pressure. We know that air is usually heavier than helium at the same pressure. We know that the air would be pulled down by gravity more than the helium, pushing the
Again,
helium
affirm the
balloon up.
consequences.
It's not affirming the consequent.
Wow, you're describing gravity. You don't even know if there is gravity. And plus, it's not a force. Plus, the acceleration is only apparent. So again, it's either a container with a physical force, or there's no pressure.
Address what he said about air weighing more than helium.
No, the
That's his-
force
that's
that you
his-
guys
that's
have
his
is
argument.
not physical.
Address his argument, please.
How do you
Chemo doesn't
weigh
have the
air?
capability of doing that.
How do you weigh air anyway?
Put it on a scale, man. You know helium trucks,
Scale-
trucks that
doesn't-
move helium across the wherever.
Scale,
They measure the amount
scale
of helium
doesn't-
in the tank of the truck by weighing the truck.
scale
And you're
doesn't
doing the
measure
same-
weight.
Flatfoot, you're doing the same thing that Lemon does. Because we need to use something
Zinc?
to hold the volume, then that automatically means that there's something to hold the volume of air in the atmosphere. It's a category area. That's
Because we
case
don't see another
it's a
satisfactory mechanism to use
demonstrable
them.
reality. It's
Yeah.
You already
demonstrable
have the
reality.
satisfactory mechanism
that.
because the air has weight.
Even the way you try and measure pressure is using containment, a container wall.
No, it's not. Have
Yes,
you ever
it is.
used a pressure pad? Have you ever used a pressure pad?
Pressure pad is a container wall. How do you think you
How?
get pressure? Pressure
What
Is
is
it containing anything,
containing
Platoin?
a surface, a physical surface. You need a physical surface to have pressure.
A
You make
container-
Okay, and what is that surface containing?
It's containing the
It
gas
is-
and keeping it from going past it.
It's measuring the pressure of the gas pushing against it, which you're making a point. You cannot have the pressure
Again.
without the physical containment.
What can a pressure pad? Put anything on the pressure pad. Where's the container?
The pressure pad would offer containment since something can't go
Whoa,
beyond
hold
it.
on. If you've got a pressure pad,
On
then you've
what
got
planet?
well, hold on. You've got a force, bearded, so you don't need a container.
Force per unit area.
You're going to apply a
So
force
what's
to a pressure pad, then
different?
you've got the force. You haven't got a force. We're asking you what's creating the pressure, and obviously it's a container.
Hold on, man. Think about that for a minute.
Yeah, Kimo just said weight is not a force.
No, I said gravity's not a force.
No, you said
Well,
weight was not a force.
The room would contain the gas, the barrel that's containing the gas. You need to contain the gas in any sort of way to really be able to do anything with it. Otherwise, just
Transport it, man. You again. You're sitting here saying this, therefore that. It doesn't follow. It's a non
that's
sequitur.
what we've seen in past
Are flat
experience.
earthers
That's what
trying to
appears
get
in
out of
mass
having to
reality.
pay for propane or something?
Apparently,
You gotta let him
confuse,
finish.
Propane cylinders contain-
Don't confuse physical forces with what you think is gravity, bearded. That's the problem here.
Oh,
do you
Jesus
think
Christ.
there's a functional difference between what everyone says gravity is, right? How they describe it. Do you think that's a functional difference than striking a pressure plate?
No, it should be
It's-
Pressure.
it's supposed to be the same thing. It's supposed to be a pulling force.
Is there a functional difference? You're not giving me any difference here.
No, there's no difference. There's a force applied.
Whoa!
It's a force applied. It's a pressure. That's what
You're
pressure is.
supposed to
Pressure is
have
a
in
force
your
applied
world-
to a physical barrier.
Sorry,
Hold on.
be clear though. Are you
Which-
talking? Look, if you're talking about gravity, then that is a force, supposed to be a force, as you tell us. So it's the same thing as punching the pressure pad.
Which is it though? Is there a functional difference or not?
No,
Because if there's not, then what's your argument?
because gravity's not a force.
Well, then make up your mind.
What?
I don't get it, Kimo.
So if gravity's
Don't
not a
get it.
force, where are you getting the weight from?
Now, here's the thing. Where do you get
Jesus
that
Christ.
from?
What?
I'm turning autistic. I'm gonna shut up.
It's really simple. Where are you getting the whole gravity's not a force thing? Is it something that you don't believe in?
Einstein.
Oh, you do believe in Einstein.
Well, first you have
It's
to.
not about believing
Well-
in Einstein. It's about where you ask, where did you get gravity not a force from? And that's
This is
from
yeah.
Einstein.
You're the one who
Well,
came
Kimo,
up with it.
Sorry, Flatson, go
Kimo,
ahead.
do you think? Sorry, do you think they would actually be able to first prove gravity before trying to make it claim it's a force in the first place?
No one's claiming it's a force. He's just asking a
I
question
didn't
about
think
it.
it was a force either.
So if it's
Yeah.
not a
Well,
force, if
force
it's
that's
not a
supposedly
force,
curved the
Nemo
Earth.
claimed it was a force.
Otherwise, the Earth would not curve in the way that it did without gravity, would it? So it
It
appears
would.
to be a force.
What Einstein had said
Like-
was he didn't describe it as a force, but he said that there's an equivalence between it actually behaving the same way a force would and it being because of curvature of space-time. He said explicitly that there'd be no distinction between them, and you could use it as a force.
In both versions of gravity described by Einstein and Newton, masses are accelerating toward other masses. When you get in between that acceleration, you're going to get forced. You're going to get squished. It's a force no matter what when you deal with weight.
no, that's the whole point.
Be
That's
a
the whole
force of the medium based off of them talking about this space-time garbage to replace the ether. So it looks like the object is not the source of the force; it's space itself.
Hey, Chemo, have you ever smashed your foot on something?
Yes.
Did the density of the material matter?
Yes.
It did.
Boom, boom.
Yeah, if it's like water.
Well, not like water. I didn't ask about water. I asked in your instance where you smashed your foot, did the density of the material matter?
Like a football.
If you want to say that, sure.
Well, the density does matter because density is per cubic volume. So if it's denser, it's going to hurt more.
So a football's got lots of air in it.
What smashed
What's
the
your think
foot?
about this?
Was it a force
Yeah.
or was it density?
My force I created.
Okay,
Like
so
pressure.
your density, the density
I
differential
didn't
didn't
say
matter.
density. I said the force that I applied, which created a pressure
Okay.
on the ball.
It's potential energy, yeah. It's a force.
Potential energy.
No, the
You guys
Energy
are
force are the
making
same
a
thing,
point.
man.
You're making a
Kinetic
point.
energy.
You need a physical. You need something physical to have that pressure. You're making a point
We
the
don't
whole
live in a
time. Don't you guys see?
non-physical world, Flatsoid. I'm sorry, you're going to have to understand that. We don't live in a non-physical world. So
Okay.
saying that statement is meaningless.
Okay, so Flatsoid. Force equals mass times acceleration. Mass is the physical stuff in that equation.
But your
Right.
acceleration is only apparent. It's not an actual acceleration. You
In
realise that?
under Newtonian mechanics, it is absolutely
Sorry.
a force.
Under any
Sorry.
mechanics,
And
acceleration is actual. Yeah.
Sorry, this mathematical equation, was it observed in reality? Did you have a hypothesis for it and an experiment to validate this hypothesis yet?
Well, you don't usually use experiments to validate a mathematical equation. A mathematical equation is a relationship between things. It's just a description of a relationship between things. But a couple of years afterwards, I think it was in 1919, the results of the math were validated when gravitational lensing was observed. So yeah,
No, that
Well,
was
even
just a
quicker-
reification of your belief.
yeah. I believe the
quicker
than that,
though,
hypothesis. I believe the
1916.
hypothesis was if we follow the logic of this math, we should observe this phenomenon. And then they went out and they experimented by testing that and making an observation. And they
so if a
observed
fortune teller,
phenomenon
if a fortune
was the
teller tells the
gravitational
future,
lensing.
so if a fortune teller tells the future, that means that the fortune teller is doing science. Is that what you're saying?
Was it a
yeah,
fortune
the
teller or was
can
it a
consistently
formula,
tell the
Flatzoid?
future,
Hold on,
yes.
hold on.
Kosher, for
If
goodness
that-
sakes, man.
If that he asked me the question, so I'm gonna
Exactly.
answer.
I'm gonna
If
make
the
this point
fortune
here.
teller, if the fortune teller can make accurate predictions and show me his methods, and then I can take those methods and reproduce his predictions, he is absolutely doing science.
So the fortune teller is doing science because prediction. That's what you're saying.
Yes,
And
with testable,
Okay.
Just
repeatable
prediction.
okay,
predictions.
okay. How would you test? Let's say the fortune teller says, "Do not walk outside tomorrow, or it's going to a toad
Not
is
what
going
I
to
said.
fall on your face."
I said
This
I said,
happens,
If he
this
gave
happens,
me,
he
if he gave me
predicted
his
it.
methodology, and I could test that
Yeah, you write that-
methodology and repeat
Don't
his
worry.
results,
It's
he is
negative.
doing
Hey,
science.
no
So,
name.
so you
No
can
name.
repeat the result
Introducing negative.
of that
Sir?
lensing. You can repeat the result of the lensing.
Hold on.
Two people were asking me a
no
question
name.
at the same time. Yeah.
Wait,
So
yeah,
you
no
can
name.
you
He's introducing a negative. Don't do something, as opposed to
no
go do.
Bearded.
Yes, you are.
Bearded. I think I was talking to No Name. Why are you trying to obfuscate for him?
I'm just
No
pointing.
Name.
I'm not
The thing
obfuscating.
is, that
Tactic.
lensing you say was predictable. How was it repeatable?
It's not about any particular
How was it
prediction,
repeatable?
Flatzoid. My point is, it doesn't matter what the prediction is. If he can
Was
make
it repeatable?
testable, yes, it's repeatable.
Okay, wait. Please repeat this lensing for me.
It was repeated 4 years ago, man.
I'm not at your fucking beck and call. You can look that shit up. If you don't
No,
believe me.
you
I don't
say you
make
can.
faceless,
You
furious
say you
claims.
can repeat. Experiment is repeatable
No,
and testable.
And it
I
has
said-
been.
People
That's
have
not
done
the
exactly
question.
that.
That's not the question you asked me.
An
You asked me
observation
if a
is
fortune
not an
teller
experiment.
made accurate predictions, is he doing science? And I gave you my specific requirements for it to be science. It has to be testable, and it has to be repeatable, and it has to give predictable results. If it doesn't do those things, if it's not testable, demonstrable, and repeatable, it ain't science.
Just fart,
Great.
dude.
So your point, great. So you, like I said, your whole crux was they saw lensing based on a prediction. So what was tested out for that, and how was it repeatable?
Did the same thing 4 years ago.
Kosho, I asked you, no name, not you.
That's great, man.
Dude,
They're cutting to the chase. They did it
That
4
is-
years
that
ago.
that is beside the point of the conversation we're having. Does that is that answer that I gave you satisfactory for my
because
usage of science?
Your usage of science, it's not science in the
Yes.
first place, because you first
Is
you
it
first have
testable? Is
you
it
first
testable,
have to
repeatable,
observe-
and demonstrable? That to
You
me
first
is
have
that
to
to me pretty
observe.
well gives a good lineup of science. Is that not an accurate? depiction?
You first have to observe the phenomena before you can make a prediction on what caused the phenomena.
That's not
You
true.
understand?
No,
That is
I
true.
don't understand. So I can't just have a wild speculative idea just pop into my brain and say, hey, I wonder if this happens, and then work out some math that would be necessary to make something happen, and then go, hey, I wonder if this is true in reality, and I go out and I make the observations necessary to confirm or disconfirm, refute my hypothesis. Why do I need to observe it first?
So math is an hypothesis now.
No, I can use math to help me figure out what set of circumstances I would need to test that hypothesis.
So in
I
other
think I
words,
said that
correlation, a prediction based on correlation is now your state that it is scientific. That's what you're saying.
If it's testable and repeatable,
Exactly. Is it testable? How are you testing it? You can predict it again based on your maths, which is just correlation because you predicted it with that, but it doesn't make
Sure.
it gravity.
sure. So okay, here we go. I'm looking through my telescope one night, and I see a planet, and it's not where I think it should be based on what I understand about the laws of motion. So I get to scribbling with Kepler's laws and Newton's laws of motion, and I see that where it is, the only reason it would be there is because some massive object is tugging on it and pulling it in that direction, right? I can't see this object. I can only see the effect. So then I go, where would that object have to be? And so I use math to figure that out, and then I point my telescope in that direction, and lo and behold, there's a planet there that wasn't there before. And I get to
Wasn't
name it.
observed.
So you're trying to talk about, let's say, Neptune. I think it was Neptune, correct? Or Pluto, what was
Oh,
discovered
no, I
by...
was going to name it after myself.
Okay. But
Yeah, I was
but you
gonna name
understand
it- I was
that's
gonna
not
name it-
science.
I was going to name it Nameless.
First of all, you first beg
So
the question.
adding to
I-
the sum total of human knowledge is not science.
First of all, you started off with the premise of using Kepler's third law, which is based on you first begging the question of having a radius, which requires you to first have your gravity to make your claim that something is pulling on it. To make
Kepler's
it.
So
first
you think-
laws aren't
so you
based
think
on
And you're
gravity.
using mathematics, and
So
you're
you
using
think
mathematics
you think Kepler read Newton and said, "Oh, I'm going to reverse engineer orbits out of this."
Kepler was before
orbits
Newton.
requires a radius.
It was the other way around. Newton
Orb-
figured out about the orbits using Kepler's laws. Kepler came before
Yeah.
Newton. He didn't use fucking gravity to do that.
I never said he came before him.
Well, then you
You
can't
need a
use something that
radius.
didn't come out yet.
Yeah.
Kepler used a deduction based of his fantasy because Venus is now supposedly Earth's same size. He based
he
everything
just
off
used
of
observations and he plotted out the movements. I mean, that's all he did.
Oh, so he
Just
didn't use
based on
science then. He
observation.
used assumptions and based everything off of those assumptions, which required him to assume the Earth had a radius. Correct?
No, he pointed his telescope at things and he looked at them. And then he looked at them every night for a really long time and he plotted out where those things have to be in relation to each other to make those movements.
Which
More
would be
importantly-
based on
That's
what?
what he did.
Would be based on what?
Those
Movements
objects'
relative to what?
positions
Relative
to each
to?
other. To each
Based
other.
from the observer, and the observer would have what? A radius, correct?
No, it doesn't require a radius. It just requires a surface
really?
for you to be standing on and an angle to the object in the night sky. You don't need a radius to do that.
Great. So you don't need a radius. Then why did he use a radius to define everything? That's how he got the ratios.
Because that's what he observed in the night sky. He observed these things moving around
making
each
him a
other
point.
in
You're making my
radiuses.
point. You're making my point. He already begged the question.
My point.
And
my
using
point is
the observation
you
as
can't say
correlation,
it's begging the question to see something moving around
that's not
something in a
science.
circle.
You just made my
and
point.
say,
It's not science.
That's begging the question. That's
Hold
called
on,
making
You just
Flatzoid.
made my point. It's not science. He's just
Hold
affirmed
on.
the consequent. That's all he's
No,
done.
Flatzoid. Are you saying a radius is affirming the consequent?
Yes, if it's not based. If you're basing everything off of that radius and then saying, "Oh, look, this has to be because I have radius," you're affirming the consequent.
What the fuck?
You're conflating two completely different concepts of radius. You realize that, right?
Did he base Kepler's third law off of a radius or not?
Kepler's third? What the?
What are you talking about? Are you talking about the third law of motion? Or are you talking about Newton's laws? Because I think you're getting those mixed up too.
Kepler's law of planetary motion.
Yeah.
Isn't Kepler's third law the one about area?
Kepler's
Fuck, I don't remember.
Kepler's third law of planetary motion states that the symbols have the usual meaning. Volume equals radius. He had to base everything off of a radius.
You're going to skip
understand?
all the rest of that and just say
radius
radius.
he's standing on. It's the radius of the orbits that are being described that when he
Orbits.
sees them in motion.
So orbit, you have to have a radius to have an orbit, correct?
An orbit has a radius.
Okay, thank you. So he was begging the question of a radius and then affirming the consequent of that radius.
No,
thank you very much. Not scientific. You just made my point. There's no
Negative.
science.
Kepler is talking about the radius of the orbit. That's not the radius of the Earth or the radius of a planet. It's the radius of the orbit. Those are two totally different things. I can't believe
That's
you're
what I
making this
said.
mistake.
You're conflating two different things.
The radius
You're conflating
of the
the radius
orbit?
of an object and the radius of an orbit. Those are two different
No.
things.
Flatzoid, what do you think a
Right.
radius is? Be honest. Since you're conflating things, what do you think a radius is?
So like I'm saying, you're not telling me, you're saying it's science.
Oh,
I'm
Jesus
telling you it's
goddamn
not science,
Christ.
and
He
I'm
won't
telling
answer
you-
the question. He won't
He
answer
won't.
the question.
Answer what
Because
question?
he knows what he's done, and he's a fucking fool. I'm not even good at math, and I figured out what he was doing. You just play word games with things you don't understand. You try to conflate them so that you can further
Sounds
your
like you
argument
butted-
that
sounds like you
everything has
butted
a
because I'm proving
three-dimensional
it's not science.
surface.
Sounds like you butted because I'm proving it's not science. It's just reifying
man.
your reality, your
Science is
belief in reality.
anything
That's
that
all.
adds to the sum total of human knowledge, dumbass.
No.
I don't think
If
You're
it's
avoiding-
something that's
Science-
testable, repeatable, and
science is an
demonstrable,
empiric-
it's science, dumbass.
Science is an empirical method used to validate a hypothesis
not a
based on
method.
observation.
There is a scientific
not a
method, but
method.
science is not a method in and of itself.
Really?
You are wrong. There are
I am wrong.
scientific methods.
Method.
Plural. There are
Method.
scientific methods.
Flatzoid,
Repeat it with me.
Pseudoscience.
There are
There's a
scientific
difference between
methods.
there's a difference between pseudoscience, which you just demonstrated, between actual natural sciences.
Really? So if I went and looked up right now where Jupiter's supposed to be tonight, and I tell you point your telescope in this direction and you will see Jupiter, and my prediction is accurate, I have not shown you that I use science.
No, you just use Sora cycle, which is observed real.
The
well,
Sarah
observed
cycle
predictions.
predicts where Jupiter's going to be. I'm pretty
What are
sure
you talking
you
about,
don't even
dude?
understand the Sarah cycle at all.
They've been
Shocker.
using. Do you think
Serocycle
before the
doesn't involve
globe-
Jupiter,
you,
buddy. Yeah.
Do you
Sarah
think
cycle's
before that
about the moon, dumbass, not Jupiter.
in
The
relation?
moon and Jupiter
Anyway.
are two different things.
I know.
think
Anyway,
he thinks
the
that.
problem is they've been observing these things for thousands of years. It has a cycle which it goes through. Just because they can predict those cycles doesn't make it scientific.
No, because
Fuck,
Jupiter.
it doesn't,
Jupiter-
dude. You can't predict something if you don't know where it's going to be, and you don't know where it's going to be if you don't know the shape that
It's
that
been
thing
observed.
describes.
Jupiter,
yes,
Mars, the
it's
moon.
observably a fucking
observed
orbit.
Throughout
orbit.
the years.
A circle.
Flatoid. Hold on. Flatoid is
If
assuming
something
that
appears,
Hold on, man. Flatoid apparently is assuming that every human civilization in the past, they all shared the information together.
who put
That
words in my
and
mouth? When did I say that?
Jupiter, Mars, the moon, and such. They don't
Talking about
share
cycles.
integral. They don't share integral cycles. There's no repeatable pattern to those three things.
Really?
Not only that, but
None of them have repeatable patterns throughout the thousands of years.
if you take Mercury for
Not all three of them together.
Mercury, for
Never
example,
seen it together.
the pattern that they expected to be repeated by Mercury is not the pattern. Is not the position that it was supposed that it was observed in.
Got an echo.
So it took predictions made by Einstein's theories to be able to
Got a
fix
bit of
it.
an echo.
That's right.
You can't use
That's right.
you can't use things like the serocycle to predict Mercury and Jupiter.
It was just a number of days for one type of eclipse cycle. That has nothing to do with any of this stuff that he's talking about.
Right.
For over 1,000 years, the Catholic Church maintained that the Earth was stationary and things rotated around it. And the Catholic astronomers tried to come up with explanations of the orbits, but they kept failing. So they kept coming up with ad hoc additions to their calculations or their predictions to make it fit what they're observing, but it never worked. They kept having to change it. It wasn't until Kepler came and it was so exact, and Copernicus, and everything matched exactly, and the Catholic Church was finally forced to abandon their nonsense.
Who was that? Who was that
Yeah,
French
because they were
astronomer?
geocentric.
He made a really good model of the solar system for Napoleon. And when Napoleon asked him where, God was, the astronomer replied, "Well, sir, he wasn't necessary for the model because it works. It works all by itself. No nudging required." And see, that was one of the problems with the old stationary Earth model, is that occasionally you would just have to have somebody come in and nudge things back to where they should be.
Yeah, because you guys are basing everything off geocentrism. When did I ever say I'm a geocentrist?
No, we're not geocentrists.
No, he's not saying
Yeah,
that.
but that was what it's based off.
Yeah.
They were based off of geocentrist, then they changed it to heliocentrist. That's why.
You said you're
That's how it works.
you're not a geocentrist, is what you said?
Yeah, because a geocentrist would require still a sphere Earth, just being the center.
Then you still think that everything revolves around the Earth, though, right?
Yes, everything moves around the Earth, but that doesn't make it geocentrist because I'm not saying we live on a sphere.
Well, Flatoid, can you explain retrograde motion of any planet? Oh, sorry, any light in the sky. Let me clarify that.
Yeah, any of the luminaries. Explain retrograde motion.
I got an idea. Can you show me can you actually observe retrograde motion in one evening for me? No, you cannot.
I said retrograde motion, and you're saying that it doesn't happen?
Not in one evening.
I just made
Nope.
up a word out of it.
Oh, Flatzoid, you fucked up.
You could observe
Show
it. You could observe it in one evening. Yeah.
Go with me, sir.
So,
I haven't.
Well, I
I
mean,
haven't
when
got it right.
retrograde motion happens, it's going to happen at a distinct moment.
Show him.
So you just find when that moment's going to be.
So show
Watch
me.
5
What
minutes
is
before it
that? Just
does,
show
watch
me.
5 minutes
Show him
after
then.
it
He
does.
wants to see it.
Are you? Oh, hold on. He's. I asked a simple question. Are you saying that it doesn't exist?
Not doubting it. He just
Because you
wants to
made
see
a
it.
claim that it doesn't.
Whoa.
I just said I haven't seen it. So if you can show me, then I can see it. It's
Yes.
that.
Whoa.
So it
But
doesn't happen because
you were citing Kepler's third law earlier, and you're not aware of retrograde orbits?
Come on, man. What's
Not-
causing those
Never
lights
said
in
I'm
the
not
sky to
aware.
go
I
in
just
different
want you
directions?
to show me. Why can't you just show it
Wait,
to me?
No, sir.
What's this-
We're
what's
having
wrong?
a discussion. We're having a discussion. It's not
Running
show and
away
tell
from
time.
actually backing it up. Just
No,
show
we're having
me.
a discussion. It's
Hold on.
accepted
Well, my
fact
live
that
stream's
retrograde
about
Alright,
motion
fine.
exists.
Let's
So
not
I'll
bring
be
up that
back.
question then. There's no point to talk about retrograde motion.
No, there's a very much a point because I want to know what causes those lights in the sky to go backwards.
How do you know they're going backwards?
Because they're not
Because
going
it's forwards
forward.
most of the time.
No, with the
wanna continue
well, can
that
you
one?
show that observation that they're going backwards?
No, we're having
you
a
gonna-
discussion. We're having
you
a
can
See,
say-
they
conversation.
can't provide
Hold on
the
a second.
evidence.
You're
No,
just going
I
to say
a very
random.
large number of the people that are here are fully aware that retrograde motion is a thing and has been measured.
You're just going to say things and not back them up.
We don't
Hey,
need
Timo.
to. It's settled science. We don't need to
Timo.
prove retrograde motion.
Not science. This is my
Well,
point.
both
It's not
Timo
science.
and hey, if you want to say
if you want to dispute it, you could go right ahead.
What?
There's
What are
nothing
you
to
disputing?
refute.
I know.
There's nothing
What-
to dispute. You're not providing the evidence.
Exactly.
are you? Hey,
Plug
if
my
you're
ears
saying
and
it
close my
doesn't
eyes, and
exist-
there's nothing to refute.
Hold on, Flatfoot. If you're saying it doesn't happen, it doesn't exist, then I just made up a word, right? I just made up a term just
No,
for shit.
I'm not saying it
That
doesn't
we all-
exist.
that
I'm
we
saying
all
if
agree
you
with,
claim
Mr.
it to
No, no,
exist,
let
then
me-
provide it.
Let him explain how I'm not making up a term.
I didn't say you're making it up. I say
Go on, Manny.
if you're claiming it, just back it up. Show it to
But
me.
everybody,
It's
look,
simple.
every astronomer knows that the outer planets will retrograde
Hey,
where they're apparent. But
I think there's a bit like flat zone retrograde motion. It's an apparent thing. It's a fact. So I think you should. I think that the
So
issue
then
is
they can show it to me.
No,
yeah, I mean,
so then
you can track it over the
you can
course of a
show it
night.
to me.
It has
As
to
easy as
do
that.
with.
well, it's an apparent thing. Okay, I mean, the question is what caused that. This is something else, but this is
Yes,
what we
apparent
see.
means you can see it.
I posted a picture.
Yeah, it's
I
apparent.
posted a
You can
picture
see
right
it.
there, dude.
It's undisputable fact. It's not like you don't even have to do an experiment. This is what you see. Period.
Anybody who looks
So
up and
when will
tracks the
someone
motion
show
of
it to
those
me?
planets
Hold on,
Posted a
Hey,
picture,
let's-
Flatzoid. It's on the fucking screen.
So tell me, Flatzoid, does it happen? And if so, what's the cause? Earth's flat. The sky is the one doing the movement. Please explain why the lights in the sky went backwards.
The reverser bird. You don't have to push the reverser bird onto me. I'm not the one
Oh,
making
It's
claims
with all
about
the.
backing it up.
It's in the same
I'm
bucket
asking
as
You
all
guys,
the
you
flatters
guys are
stuff, which
making
is
claims
nobody
about
knows.
it, and you are not backing it up. So when
Hold
you
on.
show me a video of
It's in
this
the long list of
happening,
all the other
then we
things
can
that no
agree.
flat earther can answer.
Well, the stars could be moving closer, or we could say
Hey,
not further.
how are they moving
It's-
closer? They're fixed in
It's
the
in the
dome.
bearded devil. It's in the who knows category, along with what creates the pressure gradient, what causes the phases of the moon, all those things. What causes the orbits of the planet of the
No,
moons
it's
around
actually very
planets.
simple.
It's all in the who
It's
knows
like-
category.
Jake, it's actually very simple. You guys made a claim that it happens. I say I've never seen it
I
before, so please
posted a
provide
picture of it,
evidence.
Flatzoid.
You really
Now,
think
Dr.
that
Myers
there are
posted a video.
the millions of astronomers on the Earth, or at least hundreds of thousands of them? You don't think any of them have noticed that retrograde motion isn't a thing?
Jake, I'm not trying to get him. I'm not trying to push you on him. I just want him to explain why the phenomenon happens on a
I
flat
told
Earth.
you, it's with all the other flat Earth explanations, which is
I know,
nobody
but
knows. It's the
yeah.
way God works. It's just the magic of
I'll be
God.
back later. I'm got a live
don't
stream
you-
going. I'll be back later.
Bail!
Well, you're not letting him.
No, because
I
Well, yeah,
tried.
he's
The
got to go
question-
ask. He's got to go ask QE or somebody else what causes
All right,
retrograde
he's got his
motion on
live
a
Premier
planet.
that's busy showing on my channel. You know, my YouTube channel is a bit more important than you dumbasses. So I'll be back
yeah,
later.
yeah,
Thanks.
sure.
yeah,
Bye.
I mean, the
Guy
thing is,
the guy literally says retrograde motion may not be a thing, and then calls us dumbasses.
And then runs away.
Again, never said it's not a thing. I said I've never observed it. It would
So
be nice if you can just provide
either
it. To
it
me,
is-
that's
Well,
all.
you've
So
never-
it definitely
never
is a
observed-
thing.
You've
Bye.
never observed Kepler's third
Dude.
fucking law either, dipshit. But
It's
you sure didn't mind
on the
citing that.
screen, man. Flatzoid, just you're lying or being ignorant, dude. But several people are posting it. If you're claiming you haven't seen it, it's because you're not looking at the screen that people are showing to you. You can't claim and say you haven't seen it.
That's like percent level of denial.
Why not? That's what chemo does.
Guys, on the flat Earth, you can only know things that you've seen with your own eyes for yourself. You can't rely on anybody else's observations or video or anything.
Method.
Well, that
You
and
have to have seen it with your own eyes. That's the rules, okay? I don't make the rules, but those are the rules.
that, and once the evidence is presented, you have to pretend like it never was presented.
Right.
It's also like he automatically goes to the burden of proof is not on me, while no one asked him to prove anything. We just asked for an explanation.
Yeah,
And
that's
it's just explanation, not a proof. And he's
But
like,
that's begging the question. You're assuming that retrograde motion is a thing. That's begging the question.
It's because he's one of the shittiest arguers that come in here. So his
Oh,
fucking he uses words he's heard other people say that don't even make any sense in the context of a conversation.
I'd like to get him. I'd like to
was
know
I
where
wrong?
he got
was I
volume.
wrong when I pointed out he was conflating the two concepts of radius?
yeah, I mean,
No.
orbits do not. I mean, technically, orbits don't have radius. I mean, they're elliptical. I mean, technically, there's no. There's semi-major axis, and I'm not familiar with the terms, but not actually a radius. So I don't know why he used the term radius, but whatever.
But
Well,
I mean,
'cause he assumes that the law. Yeah, he assumes that the law, because it has mention of a radius, means Earth's radius, which is absolutely not the case.
Oh, I'm totally confused right now. I know, like, okay.
Yeah, he's dumb.
Excuse me. He
Okay,
was
my
trying-
friend, I explain it. They like this.
Oh, dude, Yossi, I was doing Lyft earlier and I picked up a hot Israeli chick, dude.
She's like, hello, Kosho, I'm commando.
No, her dad. Okay, so this is what she said. Her dad was in the IMF, and he.
IDF, the IDF, yes.